After the source-heavy monstrosity that was the 50-minute R martial arts for fighting video, I think some light fun is deserved. So, Aikido technique tier list time because it's kind of easy content, but it's also something I've really been looking forward to doing. Now, like I often do in my videos, I do want to lay a bit of groundwork for this first because this is going to be just slightly different than other tier list content you might be used to. First off, if you're looking at this list as a non-Aikido person and thinking, I do not know what any of these techniques are or what they mean, don't worry, I'm going to be tossing up lots of clips throughout this video so you can get a visual. The next point is that I want to be crystal clear with my criteria. I'm coming at all of this from a non-weapon live resistance perspective, and I'm mostly making my choices on consistency, how often I have gotten this stuff to work in sparring. I know this is probably going to stir some ire with the weapons lobbyist community, but my reason for choosing not to focus on these are twofold. One, I'm honestly just not that interested. Heresy, I know, but it's my tier list. And two, I think Chris Hine has this niche much better covered and the experience with it to do so. A link to his channel will be in the description. I suggest you go check him out if you're more weapons focused. As for my criteria, you will see that the tiers are labeled as consistent, utility, niche, and doo-doo. These refer roughly to a spectrum of consistency. In other words, at the top are techniques I find to be very reliable, followed by techniques that are reliable if you can recognize when they should be used, followed by techniques that I find to be very unreliable, and then ending with techniques that I just wouldn't ever pretty much do, ever, even if I thought maybe there was an inkling I could get it. What I am not doing in this list is justifying my decisions based on quote-unquote principles. What I mean by this is that sometimes Aikido folks get a little hand-wavy with things and will be like, well, technique X is actually really important because it teaches the principle of blank. To me, all techniques have principles embedded in them regardless of art, and while some may illustrate those principles better than others, I'm not really interested in judging things along these lines. However, there is one technique on this list that I do make an exception for when discussing principles, and it's because I think it's surprisingly practical, but also very illegal in like every format ever. Your training partners will also probably mug you in the parking lot if you use it on them. It doesn't really make you any friends. Outside of that singular exception, though, everything else is going to try and stay away from theory, principles, and other abstractions. And next, you are probably going to notice some themes in this list. At this point, I have a theoretical framework for using Aikido. I know I just said I'm not going to go into theory, but this framework comes from experience, not just from me sitting in my room dreaming things up. Particularly, this framework works with grappling in the clinch. That has so far served me pretty well. I'm not going to spoil it here, but keep it in the back of your mind and see if you can spot it before I explicitly talk about it at the end of the video. Finally, just some housekeeping things. For those of you who are Aikido people, keep in mind that I've chosen the mainline Aikikai naming conventions for most of these techniques. Trying to juggle like 3 to 4 names for things is just kind of a pain. Likewise, I assume all variations are encapsulated in each technique, unless I've deliberately divided stuff out. Sometimes I might also use some more niche naming conventions if I think it's really worth calling those out, but for the most part, I'm sticking to mainline stuff. Some of the more esoteric techniques I tossed in here often get characterized as kokyunage, which has an infamously infinite number of variations. As for my selections themselves, I chose techniques that are more or less considered the Aikido canon, regardless of style. I did, however, throw a few extras in there just to keep things a little spicy. I didn't necessarily include those extras because I think of them especially well. I just think it's always worth pointing out how many things aren't in many of the curriculums that we often take as official, but do get taught depending on the teacher. Outside of that naming convention junk, just keep in mind that while this part of the video is scripted and the ending is probably also scripted, I'm just going to be assigning tiers off the cuff, which means no script, just my pure thoughts. That probably means I'll be a little bit less articulate than what even I would like, but hopefully it's at least an engaging style for this type of content. Oh, and yeah, I imagine some people are going to be very critical of my views in this, but that's fine. Feel free to tell me why I'm totally wrong about everything in the comments. YouTube loves that. I'm being a little cynical with commentary like that, especially since my comment section has historically been overwhelmingly civil, something I greatly appreciate, by the way. But the Aikido videos are also historically the ones where people write a couple paragraphs explaining how I've been wrong about everything ever since birth. While I don't personally lose any sleep over those types of things, that's just how the internet is after all, a piece of advice that I might offer those people would be this. Videos like this one are way more user-friendly if you come at them with an open mind. None of my martial arts, or totally unrelated skills even, like language or writing, have ever gotten any better by completely ignoring different opinions from people with lots of experience. If you think you're right about everything, you're living in a pond with stagnant water. Nothing grows or lives there except maybe ego. All right, without further ado, let's hop in. All right, so Kotagaish is our first one up here, and this is kind of Aikido's baby. It's the poster child. It's the one you see Rokas doing over on Martial Arts Journey a lot of the time. It's kind of what everybody thinks of when they do Aikido, and I kind of get it. It's one of those techniques that actually exists in a lot of Japanese martial arts systems and even Chinese ones. It's very famous, but and we're gonna jump right into some controversy right off the bat because it's not S tier, that's for sure. As a takedown, highly overrated in my opinion. When everything goes right with Kotagaish, usually your partner just sort of stares at you. Now, don't get me wrong, you could pain compliance them down. As a disarm, I know I wasn't going to talk too much about weapons, but as a disarm, I could definitely see the utility in this. But as a takedown, not very good. Destroying the wrist, fine, but if you want to protect your partner, and we do 99.9% of the time, not very good. Why is it as high as what it is then? The main reason for that is because I think it has a lot of other utility, and that is basically it's really good for swimming underhooks or for getting a dominant grip. Because if they resist you the opposite way, then you can swim an underhook. And if they kind of tuck this into their chest, doing the classic grappler thing that every grappler probably would and arguably should be doing because it's kind of a day one grappler stance tactic. If they tuck their arm to their chest and they don't let you get it, then at least in the gi, you should be able to throw your hand over top and get a high collar grip or a grip down the back, or even start to get around them trying to take the back and standing. So Kotagaish, not a super great takedown necessarily, but I do think it's a very good opener. Kotagaish to me is sort of like Aikido's Ko Sotogari and Ko Uchigari in Judo. If you know what I'm talking about, those are two really minor foot sweeps in Judo, and it's pretty rare that you see people look at those and be like, yeah, this is going to be my core technique. I'm going to build a whole system around this. But they're super important because they set up other things. So some judoka do actually manage to pull that off and make it their primary game, but not many. That being said, almost every judoka has it in their kit because it sets up their primary game. And I think Kotagaish fills that niche within Aikido. So again, as a takedown, not super good. As like to damage the wrist, I guess it's fine. As a way to progress position in a grappling context, pretty good. Actually, in a striking context, this isn't too bad either, because if you have two hands on, you're pulling this wrist away from the body, then they should be open for like a kick or something. What I will say is that a weakness of Kotagaish would be the grip economy. And what I mean by that is you have two hands on one of their hands and their other hand is off doing whatever the hell it wants. Now, most Aikido people will tell you that you got to use space and be on this far end to really make Kotagaish useful, which is true, but I have also noticed that when Aikido people spar, the first thing to degrade usually is their spatial awareness, and they'll just stand right in front of people and let them do whatever it is they want to do. Uh, Great way to get punched several times. So you got to be aware of what that other hand is up to. Again, I would mostly use this in the clinch. I certainly would not chase hands. I'm probably going to talk about chasing hands more because it's something I see a lot of people trying to do when they spar with Aikido. Don't do that. It's a great way to get hit like 7 times. And even if you get a hold of it after all that, realistically, you would be stunned and dazed and you wouldn't really be able to use the technique. Anyhow, all right, next up is Ikkyo. So, Ikkyo is probably the other poster child of Aikido, and it is one of 3 techniques that often gets said about, like, people will say, oh, it's the heart of Aikido. Those 3 techniques, by the way, being Ikkyo, Kokyunage, and Shihonage. Ikkyo is just all right. I would say niche. And the reason it's not complete doo-doo is that it's actually part of a greater system here. So Ikkyo, Nikkyo, Sankyo, Yonkyo, and Gokyo all fit together. And if you can get one of these, you can get the other 4, right? In that sense, Ikkyo ends up being the finisher for a lot of these, but by itself, in isolation, it is very, very, very difficult to get to. And the reason for that is because, much like Kotegaeshi, as soon as you start goofing with people's elbows, they usually tuck them, and then the technique is basically dead. There are some cheeky ways to get to it, like fishing for an underhook, pushing the face away, and then kind of getting into Ikkyo, or if you can get somebody into like a Kaitenage position, more on that later, you might be able to get Ikkyo. There's a couple ways you can get it, but consistent, no. The downside to this is that I think the end range of Ikkyo is very powerful, and that is like when you get them down to your hip level and the arm is straightened out, it's a very strong technique, but the opening sucks, and this is something you're going to see as a theme here, I bet. Aikido does not do a very good job of preparing people how to set up their techniques. And a lot of that has to do with the kind of dated way that we deal with strikes. And I know, people will be like, well, weapons though. And I get that, but I'm not really talking about weapons in this list. So because we deal with strikes the way we deal with them, unfortunately, there's a lot of space for innovation in terms of how we set things up. And Ikkyo suffers greatly from not having a whole lot of great setups. This is one that I've played with a lot. I really would love for Ikkyo to work, but honestly, the best ways for me to get Ikkyo to work is to get something else and then transition into Ikkyo. I don't know if that counts or not in your book. It does in my book, but even with that kind of loophole, I guess, I'm still not super impressed, which is disappointing to me because in like cooperative practice, Ikkyo is one of those techniques that feels like kinetically and kinesthetically very good, but then you do it in sparring and you're like, that was underwhelming. So niche, it's all right. It's just not something that's going to come up that often. All right, next up is Nikkyo, which is another kind of tough one, I think. Nikkyo is pretty good, and not the classic one that you'll often see taught in dojos, but the one where like you have their hand and their hand is on your lapel and you shoulder roll them. I get this, I wouldn't say frequently, but enough that people note on it. What I will say though is that you get this one time, like once, and then people know that it's there. And I know that sounds like a negative, but I have mixed feelings about it. On one hand, yeah, you're not tapping people out after you get it once most of the time. The flip side of that, though, is that people are hyper aware of this, and sometimes they'll just give up their grips on you, even if they're winning the grip fight, to ignore this, or to avoid Nikkyo, rather. By the way, should be noted that small joint lock's very illegal in judo, but I often kind of grapple in more open rule sets. It's judo themed, but it's not judo rules. I'm not going to go into my rule set here that often, but just think of it as like house rules. So Nikkyo, Is it good? Yeah, I would probably put it up there with Kotegaesh. It has it has utility. Uh, the other good part about it too is that if you do manage to get it and people are starting to get out, it opens up Ikkyo, Sankyo, Yonkyo, and Gokyo sort of. Maybe not Yonkyo. I'll talk about Yonkyo in a second, but it's pretty good. I've gotten Nikkyo enough times where I'm like it deserves the A spot. It's pretty decent. Um, and we'll talk about the pins and stuff associated with these a little bit later. So Nikkyo A utility, and it's fairly consistent. It's more consistent than Kotegaesh even actually. I definitely get more Nikkyos than Kotegaesh, but is it an S tier? Certainly not. All right, next up we've got Sankyo, and Sankyo is kind of one of my babies. I really really like Sankyo, and which is why it's going to pay me to probably put it where I have to put it. Sankyo is one that I definitely get more than Nikkyo even, and I think it's just because people get really lazy with their hands, and the benefit of Sankyo is kind of same with Nikkyo. If you get into Sankyo, you can get Nikkyo or Nikkyo or Ikkyo. Actually, you can get a lot of things out of Sankyo, which is why I like it so much. But oftentimes, you can just tap people with Sankyo. And there are a bunch of different variations you've probably seen. Maybe if you're in the BJJ world, there's a gi trick that you can use to get Sankyo. You can duck under the arm to get Sankyo, so you can kind of do like a throw over almost to get Sankyo. You can get Sankyo from a Russian 2-on-1. Sankyo is pretty good. I wouldn't put it in S, but it's pretty good. If I were going to devote my time to any of these core 5, Sankyo would probably be first or second place. I'll talk about who's competing with it in a second here, but Sankyo, really solid. I do like Sankyo. I wish I could get it more in like striking sparring, but in grappling it shows up enough where I'm like, yeah, it deserves its A spot. So I would definitely put it somewhere here. Yeah, somewhere like that. So yeah, I really like Sankyo. Much better than the first 3 that we've gone over so far. All right, we are finally gonna engage with Yonkyo. So I don't think I'm alone in this. Yonkyo sucks. I've met very experienced Aikidoka who cross-train in many things. I've seen other YouTubers even comment on Yonkyo, and Yonkyo is one of those ones where like it kind of mechanically makes sense, but it kind of looks to achieve what Ikkyo, Nikkyo, and Sankyo do without any of the pain compliance, with less surface area controlled, and with just the wrist. There is a little pain compliance thing on like a pressure point on your radial nerve. But if you're like me and you've been doing this art for a long time, your radial nerve is just dead. So if you don't have like clean mechanics, you aren't even getting Yonkyo in like semi-resistant contexts. Yonkyo, not very good. It's our first doo-doo tier. Would not recommend. Honestly, I get why it's in here, and it would feel weird to kind of cut out a technique that's got number 4 in its name and just to skip to number 5. But if I were going to drop something from the Aikido curriculum, it would probably be Yonkyo. Again, we'll talk about the pins later, but spoiler, I even think that the pin that comes accompanied with Yonkyo is probably one of the worst ones. Wouldn't waste my time on Yonkyo if I had a choice. Obviously, if you're progressing through the ranks in Aikido, you're going to have to learn it. It's not very good. That's just my take. All right, Gokyo. Gokyo is pretty good. Sometimes called Wakigatame if you're a judo person or a Yoshinkan person. I'm forgetting off the top of my head what they call it in Tamiki Aikido. But you've seen this lock before. I guarantee it. It's kind of in every grappling art ever, especially in Japan. It's sort of like Kotegaesh, but it's even more well known. You even occasionally, very occasionally, will see it in MMA. There's that one really famous Aoki break. Maybe I'll show it. I get squeamish watching that clip. Gokyo is very good. And the reason that Gokyo is good is that it's basically the same thing as Ikkyo, but with just more control. It's Ikkyo, but better. The only thing that Ikkyo does maybe better than Gokyo is that there's a little bit more range control on Ikkyo, but if you're just looking to tap the person out, I think Gokyo is better. By the way, I know some systems might call this Rokyo or something like that. That's great and all, but I'm talking about like the armpit straight arm lock. Um, this is a really good technique. It's very consistent. It's more consistent than Sankyo. It's more consistent than everything on the list so far. Is it S consistent? Uh, that's rough. That's rough. The other thing it does too is it opens up a lot of opportunities to get to other things. Obviously, if you're in Gokyo, you should be able to find Sankyo, Nikyo, Ikkyo, Yonkyo if you hate yourself. And you can find other things on this list too from Gokyo. You could even find things that aren't on this list. You could probably find a way to get to like Kataguruma from Gokyo. Gokyo's really good, but is it S good? Maybe. If you really, really like made a career out of it, you could put it in S. I haven't. Um, it's not because I don't think it's good. It's because I think it's kind of a basic bitch technique. Which is a really lame reason not to study something, but it's not something that's captured my interest, but it is something I acknowledge that is very good. If I had spent the same amount of time on Gokyo as I have spent on some of the other things on this list, maybe S tier. I'm going to tentatively put this in S tier. Because I could see someone be like, I swear by this. There used to be a time where this was legal in judo too, and people would occasionally get people with this. Usually destroying their elbow and cutting their career in half in the process. But Gokyo, it's pretty good. I guess it's our first S tier. I have mixed feelings about it because I'm personally not super good at it, but I'm sure there's someone out there who is. The Tamiki guys are pretty good at Gokyo. I've seen some of their clips. Okyu Nage. So this is a very difficult one because this could very easily be doo-doo depending on what variations you look at. And it could also very easily be S tier, in my opinion. Kokyunage is one of those ones I have a strong opinion on because I really like it when it comes to the ones that work. It the ones that I like, let's back up here. The ones that I like really put an emphasis on controlling the collar. And if you know anything about judo, controlling the back of the collar is super powerful. These particular kokinages, and there should be a clip on the screen right now of a variation of kokinage that uses the collar like I'm talking about. These are really good. You do kind of have to take the back, but if you don't want to do like a big uranage or a big like suplex type technique, this is a very good alternative. The flip side of that is there's a couple variations where people will like doggedly grab your wrist and then you step out of the way and you guide their hand to the ground and they just sort of roll away or walk away. And those are not very good. I don't like those. Because I'm a big Kokyunage stan when it works best, I'm going to put it in S tier. I have used this to throw people. I've used it in judo. I've used it in striking even, actually. And the key is just to get behind people. You might progress to a Russian 2-on-1 and then kind of into like a judo 2-on-1 where you have one sleeve and then one arm around their back or around their belt. And then you can move up to their collar and start to do your kokinage. There's also a variation of this where they kind of bend forward in a very defensive stance, something you might see in like a BJJ competition. And again, if you have the side, you kind of push their arm under their head while you take their back collar and pull it towards you, and it makes this circle away from their base and they fall over. I like kokinage when kokinage is at its best. When kokinage isn't at its best, it could very easily be a B or C tier. That's just my take. Some kokinages, very good. Some kokinages, very bad. And of all of the techniques on this list, if someone in the comments is like, well, kokinage is not very good because X, Y, and Z, I'm probably not even going to fight with them on that because they're right, probably. And in many regards, kokinage is not very good. But when it is good, it's very good. And I have spent hundreds of hours on this particular technique. It's awesome. I like it. This would definitely go into my personal curriculum, but that's just me. Irimanage. Irimanage gets me heated because I do. I'm just going to tell you right off the bat. This is an S tier. But, and the reason it gets me heated is that I think, going to throw out a number here, 95% of the Aikido world does it wrong. Which I know, bold statement, flexing my complete lack of a high rank in Aikido. I float around Sandan, Nidan, by the way, depending on the system. And yeah, I think most people do Iriminage wrong. Something that you see a lot of the time is they'll like do this big turn, which is fine actually, because you're kind of dragging their posture down, and then they put the hand under the head and they like try to force their head back, and this is just awful. The reason it's bad is like when someone is bent over, right, and then you're trying to push them directly back up the way they went. It's your arm muscles versus their entire posterior chain, pardon me. So who has the bigger, the more muscle fibers to recruit? It's the other person. You lose that war, even against somebody considerably weaker and smaller than you. It's not a good way to do Iriminage. And beyond that, as other people have pointed out on YouTube before, if you're kind of in that position, a foot sweep like Osotogari might be better. The way I think you're supposed to do Iriminage, and the way that I've had way more success with it, is by pulling the head away from the base, pretty much in any direction that's not backwards. So you should be pulling them like in line with their ankles. Like if you think you have both your feet lined up where your toes are pointing forward, you should be going immediately to the left or immediately to the right and pulling the far foot off the mat, which then you can kind of cut back the way you came. It'll make them step back and do that kind of like matrix backbend. Then you can get the Iriminage. Also, you shouldn't be like moving directly with them in like a parallel line. If you were looking at Iriminage's execution from above, it should be like a plus sign or at least like an X, where you're kind of cutting across their torso, not moving in line with their torso. If you're moving in line with their torso, Osotogari from Judo is a way better choice. Most people, I do not think, are doing Iriminage correctly, and this is probably, in my opinion, one of the most watered down techniques in the entire curriculum. It could be very powerful. It's not the way that most people do it. And for what it's worth, no one taught me the way to do it that I do it now either. It took really since 2020 I started looking at Iriminage. I saw some videos of Chiba Sensei, who I've put up on this channel a lot before, and was very inspired by his way of doing it. I don't think he does it exactly the way I do it. It's very, I hate to sound not humble, but his is the closest, but I still think it could be improved. And that's not to say that my version couldn't be improved, but by far, his version of doing Iriminage is the best I've ever seen. For what it's worth, I've never trained with Chiba Sensei, and he's quite dead now. But I do think he's had the best Iriminage that I've seen in Aikido. So Iriminage, I'm putting it in S tier. This gives us 3 S tiers. You might think I'm kind of biased, but don't worry. We're going to start filling up some of these lower tiers now. Tenchinage. So I've had a couple commenters who seem to really like Tenchinage, and I have a feeling I'm going to alienate those poor people. Tenchinage strikes me as one of those techniques that's more about teaching how to deal with push and pull in the art than it is about actually teaching a takedown. It typically requires the other person to have double wrist control on you, and they hold on for dear life even when their position is compromised. It's not super good. There are niches where it is okay. I've seen a couple Greco-Roman matches where a Tenchinage-like thing comes out, and it usually happens when one person has those wrist controls and they're pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing, and then the person who throws the Tenchinage on kind of pivots out of the way and throws them. That's pretty good. But Tenchinage is one of those ones that suffers, I think, in climates where there are no serious push-out rules. This is a kind of topic that I've brought up many times before in the channel, But Aikido really seems to do better with severe push-out rules. The more severe the push-out rules are, the better the correlation is with Aikido getting better. And I would say like it gets like, I don't know, 25% more effective when there are severe push-out rules. I don't think that's by mistake. Daito Ryu, Aikido's predecessor art, was founded by a guy who was an amateur sumo champion, and all those guys practiced sumo in like a very amateur way after classes and things. I don't think it's a mistake that a lot of the Aikido curriculum can be found in sumo's kimarite, their winning techniques or their throwing techniques. Nor do I think it's a mistake that a lot of these make more sense in the presence of pretty severe push-out rules. So, Tenchinage, spiel aside, I would put it as niche. You got push-out rules going on where the other person is really incentivized to grab your wrists, then maybe if I were doing this this list based on principles, then maybe it's S tier, but I'm not. I'm doing it based off of things that I get to work. Tenchinage, it's almost Judo tier. If I hadn't seen Greco-Romans actually throwing people with this technique, I don't think I'd be putting it in niche. I think Ikkyo's better, quite frankly. And Ikkyo's already very niche. So, Tenchinage guy in my comments section, I am so sorry. If you're like a maestro at this and you have some secret tech to set it up, freaking comment me, dude. I'd love to see that because make me a believer. Make me a believer. That's all I'm saying. Kokyuho. So this is one of those ones that sometimes gets put under the Kokyunage umbrella. I always learned this as Sokumin Iriminage, which puts it under the Iriminage umbrella. But you might know it as Geidan Ate, I think, or maybe Shomenate in the Tamiki system. I know I said that we were going to be going down into these kind of niche techniques, but this one's really good. This one is really good. I've seen this in a lot of other martial arts. I know there's going to be some capoeira guy that comes through and is like, oh, that's one of our, it's a V word. I know what you're talking about. I've seen the videos, somewhat famously, I guess, or maybe it's not famous, but it's saved to my playlist. Jeff Chan on MMA Shredded uses this. It's also in Muay Thai. He obviously doesn't know it is Kokyuho. I think he learned it maybe in a Muay Thai school, or at least in a Muay Thai context. But my point is that this is in a lot of martial arts, and for good reason. It's really good. S tier. I'm not super great at it. I'd like to be super great at it. I'm still working on it. This one's probably the newest addition to my kind of focus as of late. Also worth noting out while we're here, by the way, I mentioned themes at the beginning of this video. Kokyuho, Iriminage, Kokyunage, Gokyo, Ikkyo, Sankyo, pretty much everything on here. If you think about the position that you have to be in to get these techniques, you are basically on the outside of the person's arms. So another way of putting that is something I've brought up on the channel before. Basically, you're kind of in a Russian 2-on-1 position, or maybe in like a judo 2-on-1 position where you have a sleeve or an arm and then one arm around their back. This is where Aikido lives. If you are directly in front of somebody, you do have options, but they are significantly dwarfed by the options that you have if you are on the outside. So if you're somebody who's like, man, I really would like to incorporate Aikido techniques into my game, then you need to figure out how to get around people. And there's lots of ways to do that. Wrestling has like throwovers and things like that. You can wrestle up from a leg. Judo, you can kind of like feint into a Soretsuri Komigoshi and then kind of rope your hand, or like use their arm as a rope and kind of get around. You can throw their arm past and then arm drag. There's a lot of ways to get around, but if this is the kind of technique that you want to use in your grappling system, or even in your striking system, you need to figure out how to get around people. This might sound like a weird Aikido kind of detriment, but it's really not. If you think about any grappling art, taking someone's back is good, right? that's really all you're doing. You need to get at least to their shoulder on the outside, but if you can take their back, that's pretty much even better. And arguably, if we were talking about principles, that's what Irimi Nage is about. And that's why a lot of people, the founder included allegedly, said that Irimi Nage is the heart of Aikido. And if you think about other grappling arts like BJJ or Judo, you could probably make the argument that the heart of those grappling arts is getting to the back. I'm not sure everybody would make that argument, but I think it's a pretty solid one. So if you think about where these happen, one of the themes is you got to be on the outside. And Kokyuho, Sokuminari Minage, Geiranate, Shomanate, whatever you want to call this, is no different. Being squared up with someone, not usually where Aikido lives. And that's why I mentioned earlier that I've seen a lot of Aikido people, when they start sparring, they completely forget this. It's also worth noting that, remember how I said that Aikido doesn't really prepare students for the setup? Well, the setup is getting to the outside. If I were building an Aikido curriculum, getting to the outside is one of these core things that we'd have to work on, because that's where all this stuff typically happens. Kotegaeshi maybe not so much, but even Kotegaeshi has the Tenkan version, the big kind of spinny version, which probably is less reliable than the normal version, but it still happens on the outside is the point that I'm trying to make. Like, of everything that I've tiered so far, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I'm not even going to count Yankyo, screw Yankyo. 6 or 7 of these really happen on the outside of the person's torso. So, long spiel short, you really got to take the back in Aikido, which, not something Aikido people talk about that much, but man, it's a grappling universal, and it's a good one to learn, and I wish it were better represented in the Aikido curriculum. All right, Kaiten Nage is one that I've come around to recently. Not the projection version of the throw. I think that one kind of sucks. I guess if you're throwing someone into something, hypothetically, maybe, but let's be honest, how often are you doing that in the dojo? Not very often, unless you're just being a total monster, and you're not making any friends. Although I will say that in terms of like projection throws, the ones that make people roll, at least allegedly, I think a lot of the techniques that make people roll in Aikido, really people just kind of walk or run out of, which isn't really a big deal if you're just trying to make space. There's that whole multiple opponents argument, which is fine. I have mixed feelings on it, but it's fine. If you're just trying to get rid of someone, make space so you can run away in like a self-defense situation, I guess that's legitimate. But of the projection throws in Aikido, I think Kaitenage is actually probably the best. You can kind of mechanically force someone to roll out, but I'm not talking really about the projection throw. If I was talking about the projection throw, it would probably go into niche. I'm talking about you get a deep underhook, they're bent over, and you just kind of take a big back step and you drag them to the floor and do a pin. This is pretty consistent, actually. Can't believe I'm saying it, but it really is pretty consistent. And I think it drops you into one of the most powerful pins in the Aikido system. The number of times in Judo that I will go for like an O-Uchigari or a really scuffed Uchimata, because I'm not very good at Uchimata. I have the flexibility of someone twice my age, tragically, at least below the waist. And people will like post on the mat with their free hand that I don't have underhooked and then bend over. That's the setup for Kaitenage. And you could get into this position too with like snap downs, gi snap downs, whatever. As long as somebody is bent over, they're like below your torso level or they're at your waist level and you have an underhook, you can get this like drag out Kaitenage. Is it the most pretty throw in the world? No, but that's not what this list is about. And it does drop you right into a pin. So projection throw, probably niche. Not projection throw, the drag out version, the one that I use more frequently, S tier. Can't believe that there's this many in the S tier. When I first kind of came up with this list, I'm like, there's no way there's gonna be that many in the S tier. I think maybe 3. But looking at what we're coming up here on, yeah, some of these are not going to be in the S tier. We're approaching the end of S tier's reign. So if you're thinking, wow, this guy is a super Aikido stan, yeah, I am. I'm an Aikido Andy, but not not to this degree. There's going to be a lot of techniques coming up where I'm like, yeah, nah, this kind of sucks. Don't worry. This will all balance out by the end. Oshinage, hip throw. Um, I'm not even going to try and dress this up. It's an S tier and I won't apologize. Hip throws are hip throws. If they're in Aikido, they're hip throws. If they're in Judo, they're hip throws. If they're in wrestling, they're hip throws. A hip throw is a hip throw, and hip throws are good. They're all over the place. There's a reason that they're all over the place. Aikido does this really stupid thing where they, at least here in Japan, I get so irritated with Koshinage here because they almost refuse to put their hip into it. They're like, Aikido hip throws are totally different from all the other hip throws. Grow up. Grow up. Hip throws are hip throws. Stop trying to brand everything. Koshinage is very good. And again, it's one of these ones that you can do squared up, but it's even better when you're entering from the outside. And what I like about this, actually, if you're noticing, with the exception of maybe Gokyo here, these all kind of make a system. Kokinage, you're going to the back. Iriminage, you're going to the front. Kokyoho, you're going to the front. Kaitenage, you're kind of getting an underhook and stepping back. And Koshinage, you're going to the front. So if you are on the side, what really kind of divides most of these is if you're stepping in front of them or you're stepping behind them. And I guarantee you they can only resist you one direction. So then you just choose the opposite and throw them. It's really great. Oh crap, I totally forgot. By the way, Kokyuho, there's a very, very little known Aikido system, I guess if you want to call it that. It's really not an Aikido system, but it sort of is. It was built by, what's the guy's name? Minoru Mochizuki. It's Yoseikan Aikido. And he was a judoka and an aikidoka, and I think he does EI too. Don't quote me on that. He also did an old school Koryu Jiu-Jitsu, and he has a lot of sacrifice throws. He has a version of Kokyuho that's a sacrifice throw. That's really cool. Pretty good too. I think he has a sacrifice throw of Kokinage too. If I can find him, I'll toss him up on screen. That's just kind of a addition to previous segments here. But just pointing out that there's actually a lot of variations to some of these. No matter how you spin it, though, starting from the outside, if they resist you on the front side, you go to the back. If they resist you on the back side, you go forward. If they resist you any other way, I guess you go to the Kaitenage if they bend ways over. Like I said, I haven't worked too hard on Gokyo. I'm sure there's a way to weave this in there. And if you weave this in here, I guess you could probably get Sankyo and Nikyo to work too. But Ikkyo, if you really just want to do worse Gokyo. Maybe not Kotegaeshi. But my point is that there is a system here. It's just not explicitly taught in Aikido, and it should be. It's a real problem that they don't explicitly teach this system in Aikido, because really most of what Aikido is get to outside, figure out which way they're resisting you, do the opposite. I'm really oversimplifying there. There's more to it than that, but if you want to use Aikido in a live setting, it's real simple. Get to the outside, figure out which way they're resisting you, go the other way. It's not rocket science. None of this esoteric bullcrap that sometimes you see. This is a very detailed technical art, but it does not have to be a big deal. It really doesn't. There's a very simple roadmap to success using Aikido techniques. Aiki Otoshi. So this is kind of like Kokyuho or Sokumin and Imanage, but instead of kind of going to the top of the body, you're going towards the legs. In Aikikai in Japan, recently, they've gotten real goofy about this. Like, no, we don't touch the legs. And again, I've got the same opinion on this as Koshinage. Why? It just makes it better. That's not to say that you can't wrap around the hips and do this. You can. But I always learned it from the legs. Like, I remember back in the I guess it would have been early 2000s to late 2000s. Before 2010, we always used to do this with the legs. It was the basic way to do it. It's the Kihon way. It's the way you did it on tests. And it's only been since I come to Japan, they're like, no, we don't do it that way. Because if you touch the legs, it's like Judo Sukuinage. Oh no, things look the same in grappling arts. Stupid branding bullcrap. It's a good technique. Once again, this is another one, by the way, where you got to be on the outside. This is kind of turning into the friggin' S tier list. Like, I promise. I think I just backloaded all the bad ones. I kind of did. Um, oops. Well, we're getting into it. These are good. These are all good, and they're all good because of the same thing. Get to the outside, figure out which way they're resisting you, go the opposite direction. That easy. When you slot these into that system, these make way more sense than when they are done in isolation. Um, there's some grip economy things you have to be aware of, but these are things you can train around. These are deficits you can train around. You also notice, though, that with the exception of this one, with the exception of Gokyo, none of these are joint locks. These are all attacking the torso. Funny. It's almost like that's by design, at least in the tier list. I don't think it's by design in the curriculum. These just kind of get thrown haphazardly in across the ranks. But in my way of thinking about it, it's definitely by design. Come back to that towards the end of the video. Sumi Otoshi. This is one I really, 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 really wish worked better than it does. Because it's cool. Like being able to grab someone and just throw them with two hands on one arm. And yes, I know the Tamiki people are like, it scores, and it does. It does score, and that's going to earn it maybe a slot in niche. It's not doo-doo. It does work. There's clips of it working, clips that I'm probably going to put on screen, but it's really tough to get to work, and it really works in very, well, niche situations. I wish it worked better. The problem that I have with Sumiyotoshi is that every time I do it the Aikido way, where it's like two hands on one arm, I'm immediately reminded that Judo's Tayatoshi exists, and it's just better. It's just an upgrade. Sumiyotoshi does have some utility, but not really enough to bring it up to the level of these other techniques in my mind. Have I gotten Sumiyotoshi to work in sparring? Nah, really. I've gotten close a couple times, but most of the time it just ends up being like a kind of scuffed Tayatoshi. Tayatoshi being one of my favorite judo throws, especially drop Tayatoshi. And I do a kind of Aikido Sumiyotoshi inspired drop Tayo, but by itself, that's just not very good. And I find that to be very disappointing. I've spent a lot of time on Sumi, and again, if somebody's out there who knows better, maybe you are a Tamiki guy, dude, I would love to learn how to make this consistent. But I haven't learned how to make it consistent. It's going into the niche tier, if for no other reason than to stop the onslaught of S's, so people don't think I'm just talking out of my ass. But no, Sumiyotoshi really isn't very good. By the way, the Judo Sumiyotoshi follows the same principles, and it's equally not super good. In my opinion, there's a lot of things in competitive judo these days that are being called Sumiyotoshi that have very little to do with classical Sumiyotoshi. I think in the future, if I ever did, say, like a Kokinage in a judo tournament, just something I've totally thought about doing before, and if the refs gave me any trouble, I'd be like, oh, dude, it's Sumiyotoshi, it's a Teiwaz, which is really stupid, but they call Sumiyotoshi, they call everything in judo Sumiyotoshi that is basically just a Teiwaza these days. It's very weird. Has nothing to do with my Aikido tier list, but if you ever want to like go into a judo tournament and like disguise Aikido techniques as judo techniques, just call it Sumiyotoshi. That's my strategy. I don't know if it works. I'll let you know if I do that. I'm probably going to train at the Kodokan soon, and maybe I'll do the. I'm already Yudansha in judo, but not Kodokan recognized, so I might do the white versus red tournament just to see how it goes. Maybe I'll get absolutely trashed, which would be funny. But if I don't, if I end up doing some of these things and anybody gives me in trouble, like, oh, dude, it's just Sumiyotoshi. I don't know what you're talking about. It's the way I've always done it. Totally. It's just Sumiyotoshi. Anyway, Aikido Sumiyotoshi, niche tier, B tier. Not very good. Wish it were. It's very troublesome that it's not, because I've spent way too many hours trying to get it to work, but B tier. Rip. Yubi Shime. So remember at the beginning of the video how I said I wasn't going to talk about principles, but there was one technique I was going to make an exception for? This is that technique. Yubi Shime is basically a straight finger lock. I have always learned it as pretty much any finger manipulation, though. So pulling single fingers away from other fingers. I'm going to leave this unranked, to be perfectly honest with you, for a couple of reasons. One, a lot of jiu-jitsu schools were very worried about this, or at least they put it up in the forefront. If you look at a lot of manuals, I would recommend, what's his name? Eric Shahan's stuff on Amazon. You can order a bunch of stuff. I think Chatty over on his channel has talked to him in an interview before. There's a lot of manuals that he translates, and they are, broadly speaking, pretty concerned about this particular technique. They don't usually do it in the classic Aikido way, but it's still Yubi Shime. This also shows up in very early judo manuals, I think. Don't quote me on that. I'm going to look at my PDFs, and if I can find it, I'll toss it up on screen. But it definitely shows up in tons of jiu-jitsu schools. And I think the reason for this is like playing with people's fingers sucks, in short. But it's kind of an antidote for like the grappler stance. If people start tucking in their arms and then you start bending their fingers in weird ways, suddenly that usually frees up some space between their torso and their elbow. And then you could start doing a lot of this other stuff. I don't want to overstate this and say that Yubi Shime is like the secret sauce to making Aikido work. I don't think I would go quite that far, but I will say that like through my martial arts career, right? Like my wife is a martial artist and she's like 40 pounds less than I am. And when we're just kind of goofing around and grappling, when she starts grabbing fingers, it's like a psychological block. And it's not because I don't trust her or anything like that. It's just that if she zigs when she should have zagged while she has like my pinky and my ring finger, those fingers are gone. This is really under talked about in martial arts. And I think the reason it's under talked about is because it's illegal and everything, which is why I kind of refuse to tier it, because I don't know how good it is. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that if we started doing this, it would revolutionize Aikido. But I do have a feeling that it would make things a lot different. I also understand, though, why we don't do it, because you can't have professional fighters nursing finger wounds after every single professional match, or even dojo matches for that matter. So something to keep in mind, finger manipulations suck. They could make all of these things a lot better. Early jiu-jitsu and even judo was very concerned with this kind of technique. By very concerned, I don't mean like there was huge lectures on them or anything, but these almost always showed up in manuals. So Yubi Shime, I'm not ranking it. It's kind of going into a theory hole, but I will say just from like goofing around with my wife, or even sometimes like when you train with kids, like and you're teaching them like kotegeis, right? And they have a third the hand size as you. You were like, all right, don't worry about manipulating my wrist. Just grab the fingers and turn like a steering wheel. This is surprisingly effective. If you're willing to give up your fingers, then maybe not. But even me, who's pretty seasoned with like joint locks and things like this, there's always an itch in the back of my mind that's like, don't let them rip your fingers off. Yubi Shime, underrated, I think. I'm not rating it here. I'm not going to say that it would change everything. I think that's probably an overstatement. But I'm also not going to say that it wouldn't change some things, because I think it would. Will we ever see this in a competitive format? Doubt it. And I understand why. So, unranked. The principle of it is good. I think it's worth keeping in your mind, maybe experimenting with if you have a particularly liberal uke, I guess. They're willing, they're very trusting. But yeah, interesting technique. I've almost made a standalone video on this multiple times, but I also don't really want to inspire people to go just start goofing with people's fingers mid-match. Great way to lose friends in the dojo. Shihonage is next, and I have so many feelings about Shihonage. So Shihonage, for a long time, was kind of my white whale. When I was trying to really make Aikido functional and live resistance initially, I kind of started from some of those probably apocryphal Ueshiba quotes where it's like Ikkyo, Shihonage, and Kokinage slash Idiminage are the heart of Aikido. And I'm like, okay, so we'll start from there and we'll build back, right? Obviously, kind of disappointed with Ikkyo, but I understand conceptually where that came from. Kokinage and Idiminage, I'm a big fan of. Shihonage, though, I want to be a fan of it. I really do. Shihonage is one of those things when you're doing it with a partner in a even semi resistant environment. It feels good, especially when you snap 180 degrees and like the end range of this technique feels very powerful. I cannot get this thing to consistently work for the life of me. And the reason I can't is that when you do the Shihonage cut, people drop their elbows and then you can't go under the arm and therefore you can't get the Shihonage. And I think this is the reason why some styles of Aikido, like Tamiki in particular, I'm thinking of, they kind of do a variation of Shihonage, but they don't go under the arm. And I think that's because they're answering the problem of the dropping elbow. If you could manipulate the elbow to like go across the body, maybe you could get under and through it. It's really disappointing because I like the feel of Shihonage. It's also the one that kind of is the main metaphor for the sword in the art, in my opinion. You could argue that some of the other ones are too, but Shihonage especially stands out as something like that. So conceptually, again, I get where maybe people are coming from, that Shihonage is like the heart of the art. But in terms of actually doing it, it's not super good. I think in Gozo Shioda's books too, both Jinsei and Shugyo, he talks about how Shihonage is good if you can like load the arm onto a shoulder. So almost do like a straight arm lock on your shoulder and then roll into it. That's an interesting idea. And I have not been able to replicate the straight arm lock that he's talking about. There's probably room for some theory crafting and some practice with Shihonage, but it's just not very good, unfortunately. The setup isn't very good. I will say this, though, little tangent. There's a technique in judo called reverse seoinage, which recently got banned. And I have a funny little story about reverse seoi. By the way, I'm bringing it up because reverse seoinage is basically Shihonage to the person's lapel. Cool variation. I would call it Shihonage if it were in Aikido. It would just be a variation of Shihonage. I don't know what I would call it. Maybe like Eri Shihonage or something like that. Anyway, the reason I bring it up is way back in 2017 when I was practicing at the university with other Aikido kids. I say kids. I guess I was an adult at the time. They were more like kids. When I was training there, a lot of people were kind of experimenting with reverse seoinage as seen in judo. And it was kind of this under this umbrella of Shihonage. And at that time, I'm not sure where they got it from. Maybe there was a couple judoka that trained Aikido with us, and maybe they brought it in. I'm not sure where it came from. Maybe people were just watching judo highlights a lot or something. But they were training with this, and it seemed reasonable enough to me because it really is. It's just Shihonage to a lapel. And one of the senseis, one of the supervising senseis, caught wind of this. He saw people kind of goofing with the variation, and he was like, no, that's a judo thing. Again, stupid branding. I don't know why when something is that similar to your art already, you don't just pick it up and adopt it as a variation. So dumb. It's absolutely dumb. And I know that I'm kind of a radical in the sense that I would like to see pretty vast expansions of the curriculum, but this one seems like a no-brainer. It's literally the same technique, just not to an arm. There's really very little differences. But he was just like, no, we got to stop that. That's judo's thing. That's not real Aikido. Blah, 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 blah. So stupid. And then, like a year, 2 years, 3 years, what was it? 2020, maybe 2021. Not long after. judo bans reverse seoinage. So now judo is not doing reverse seoinage. And again, it has not been picked up by Aikido, even after the ban. So it's not a legitimate judo technique. It's not a legitimate Aikido technique. No one's training it anymore. I know there are people who be like, oh, it's gi reliant, but screw that. That doesn't mean that you should toss it into the bin to collect dust and no one ever practices it anymore. All of the martial arts I do are in the gi. There's no reason that should not be a legitimate variation of Shihonage. Bothers the hell out of me. What was I talking about? Yeah, the basic version of Shihonage, though, and the one that you see classically in Aikido is not very good. I'm not gonna say you never get it. They do a version of it in Tamiki. I'm gonna put it in niche. But this is, to use a term that I really don't like using from the BJJ side of the internet, it's very low percentile. It's just not very good. I wish it were good though, because it feels awesome. This is one of those ones though that suffers from the need for a setup. And I think if I were going to go and try and work on this more, I do think the Russian 2-on-1 is the place to start. But I still have work to do on that. Doing this square to someone in relation to them, like in space, is basically impossible. And again, people just have to drop their elbow or tuck their arms. This is just one of those ones that's really tough to get. It's tough. I like it. I wish it were better. Hopefully someone out there can come up with a cool way to make it work one day. I'm not sure I'm that guy, unfortunately. I wish I were that guy, though. Cool technique. B tier. All right, now we are sort of getting into some of the esoterica. I would consider the next three to be fairly esoteric techniques. And there are many more in Aikido, by the way. There's a lot of variations on things that different people show. I just kind of arbitrarily chose three. One from the system that I do, and two that I'm aware of but don't really do. I'm aware of Kubinage from karate, actually. And I have feelings about Makiatoshi. But first, let's talk about Ude Garami Nage, which is arm entanglement throw. If you do judo, you know what Ude Garami is. Actually, if you do BJJ, you know what Ude Garami is. But imagine that in standing, and you use it to kind of torque the arm and throw a person. It's a pretty good throw. I think it's probably better than Shihonage. It's kind of what the Tamiki guys are doing as their Shihonage stand-in. By the way, I'm not sure if like officially that's their Shihonage stand-in, but it does seem to be their answer to the duck under problem. Udegarami is also really easy to get into out of like a Gokyo. It's one of the few like joint locking techniques on the arms and standing that like, yeah, I've gotten into this a reasonable number of times, and it's not fun. As a takedown by itself, it's not super smooth, but people are going to go down because it's not comfortable. It's not a fun time. Utility is okay. Like you can get to other things out of Udegarami Nage, but usually it's kind of a finisher. I think I'm going to put it in the A rank just because it's consistent. I would say it's about as consistent as Nikyo or Sankyo. You just control more surface area. I would say that Udegarami Nage is kind of like Shihonage and Kotegeshi, but better because you control more surface area. And it has a clear entry through Gokyo. It has a pretty clear entry from like a Russian 2-on-1-2 or a Judo 2-on-1. It's pretty good. Is it the best? Is it S tier? No. But it's pretty good. I know a couple people in my dojo back in America that are huge fans of Udegarami Nage, and I understand why. It feels good, especially early in your Aikido career. This is one of those techniques that is very difficult to teach in like an abstract way. Like people are going to understand this right out of the gate. Whereas something like Ikkyo or Sankyo or even like Kokinage is like, what are we doing here? I think for most beginners, this one is like, wow, that hurts. It's very obvious what's going on mechanically with Udegarami Nage. So I understand why it's pretty popular where I come from. But it's not my favorite. It's just one of those things that I throw into the mix when it comes up. Decent, not the best. Maki Otosh. So I don't like Maki Otosh. This is one that I did learn through the Aikikai briefly. By the way, my system is kind of this Frankenstein's monster of Yoshinkan and Aikikai. I would say 70% Aikikai, but this is not one that has made it into our system. It's okay. It translates to rolling drop. Usually you're going to a knee or to both knees, and you're kind of doing like this Ippon Seoinage drop Seoinage thing. I'm going to actually say this is doo-doo. The reason I'm going to say it's doo-doo is that even though you can get some good centripetal force going and throw somebody that way, Seoinage is just better. It's just an upgraded version of Maki Otosh. It just is. Fight me. I don't like this one very much at all. And it doesn't really have a whole lot of utility either because you're going to the ground. So not only are you going to the ground, it doesn't really drop you into a pin. There's a better way to get the same result. This feels like Aikido's answer to like Ippon or like drop Ippon Seoinage or drop Seoinage. And it feels like it existed in kind of the same weird space as the way they're doing Aiki Otoshi and Koshinage now, where they're like, yeah, we have that technique, but it's totally different from judo's for totally arbitrary brand reasons. Never forget that your martial art is a product, is all I'm saying. And Maki Otoshi, it's an interesting idea, I guess, but judo just has so many techniques that are similar and better. They do the same thing, but better. I don't know what else to say. Don't try and reinvent the wheel, I guess. But I would definitely say Maki Otoshi is a doo-doo technique. If you really want to learn something like this, I would say go to judo and learn drop seoi or drop ippon seoi and have a good time. You really don't need to learn Maki Otoshi from an Aikidoka, in my opinion. I know there are some Aikidoka who are like, this is the best thing ever. I'm not a believer on this one. I don't think I can be swayed, honestly. But post your videos of it working in a judo match, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. This is just so close to Ippon, and Ippon is so much more refined in judo. So that's my thoughts on Maki Otoshi. Fubinage, neck throw, or sometimes like head throw, which is kind of like you reverse collar tie the head and then pull the person down into the mat. And oftentimes in demonstrations, you'll see people doing a big fall out of this. And again, I learned this actually in karate long before I learned it in Aikido. It seems like this is mostly a Chiba sensei thing again. I think he's using it mostly as a complement to his Hariminage when people like roll out too far. But I don't like it very much. It's sort of a cool idea where like you're trying to drive the person's head into the ground. But again, even though you're dropping your full body weight, so I guess maybe you could make it work, people just roll out of it. Maybe it doesn't work at all. Like as long as people have good posture, I think maybe if people are bent over, like in Kaitenage, you could probably get this to work. But it's also not very safe if it does work. And if it doesn't work, you're in a really awful position. Is it doo-doo? No, I don't think it's doo-doo, but I don't think it's super good either. It's not something I would do. I'm going to put it in a niche. Doesn't have a whole lot of utility either. Like when you're committed to doing Kubinage, you're doing Kubinage. There's not a whole lot of other techniques you can transition into. It doesn't really slot into a system very well. Yeah, you can do it out of like a Kokyu or an Arimi, maybe a Kokyu Ho, but other like you can't backtrack, right? So like with a lot of these other techniques, like I'm doing Aiki Otoshi, that doesn't work. So I'm doing Kokyu Ho. Oh, that doesn't work. So I'm gonna step out and step back around. I'm gonna try Kokinage. Oh, that doesn't work. Maybe I can get like these all kind of flow into each other. You can move across them backwards and forwards, whereas something like Kubinage, or even something like Sumiyotoshi, Tenchinage, Udegaraminage to a lesser degree. Like you can't backtrack. Once you're in them, you're in them. And you got to commit. So I don't like that. I think one of the strengths of Aikido is that you can move across the techniques pretty seamlessly. And that's not unique to Aikido. Like you can do a lot of that with the Ashiwaza and Judo too. But I think it is a mark of a healthy system that you are able to move across the curriculum fluidly, which means you don't have to 100% commit to a technique to make it work. That doesn't mean that commitment isn't important. Of course it is. But usually, if you're a smart martial artist, you can tell, like, man, I'm like 70% committed to doing this technique. It's not going to work. Time to bail out. And Kubinage and like Tenchinage and Sumiyatoshi, they don't have a whole lot of bailout options. Makiatoshi either. So you can't really bail out of those safely. If you're doing them, you're doing them. And I don't like that. I'm not a huge fan. So niche, I guess. Could it work? Sure. Is it safe even if it does for your partner? No. If you're a self-defense person, knock yourself out, I guess. You got good uke. Knock yourself out, I guess. But this isn't something I'd be spending a lot of my time on, personally, at least. Osai Komi. So this is basically all the pinning techniques. And I know that's a big umbrella to put things under here. Some are really good and some aren't. I think the Shihonage pin kind of sucks. You can roll out of it. Ikkyo is a little bit better, but you can still roll out of it if you have any flexibility. Yonkyo, it's okay. Maybe the same as like the Kotegaeshi pin. It's also okay. The Kaitanage pin, great. The Nikyo and Sankyo pins, also great. Just occurred to me that I did not put Juji Nage on this list. I guess a little bonus. Juji Nage would probably go in doo-doo because I don't see it coming up that often. Maybe niche. And the Osai Komi for Juji Nage is very niche. So, yeah, meh. But anyway, Nikyo, Sankyo, Kaitanage, Osai Komi, super good. Very good, very consistent. I use it all the time. And in fact, if anything from Aikido was going to get adopted by another art, I am super surprised that BJJ has not tapped those techniques yet. They're hard to get out of. You get them from a weird position, which is belly down, like the person you're doing to them is belly down, which is, I think, why you don't see them that often in like judo, for example. But they are very, very good. If I get somebody in like a Nikyo pin, I am confident, unless they are uber flexible or like 4 times stronger than me, which isn't necessarily impossible. I'm not a huge guy, but I think I can hold them down. And I think I could probably tap them too, but I could definitely hold them down indefinitely. Those are really, really powerful techniques. They just pin the shoulder to the mat. Super good. But because this is kind of an umbrella term and some of these aren't very good, I'm not going to put it in S. If it were just the 3 that I really like, I'd put it in S. I'm going to put it in A, I think, because some of these kind of suck. Like I would never find myself doing the Jujinage pin or the Shihonage pin. Those would be doo-doo to me because you just kind of back roll out of the Shihonage pin, and the Jujinage pin, there's so much going on that it's just not realistic in my opinion. Yonkyo pin is actually better than Yonkyo itself. And the Kotegaeshi pin isn't bad. Just not great either. Yeah, Nikyo Sankyo definitely ways better. Gokyo kind of has like a pin where you go like into like a Newaza thing. That's good. You see that in judo sometimes though. So not much to say about that. It's good. So Osai Komi is really powerful in Aikido. I'm not sure why people haven't picked up on this yet. Probably because people just see Aikido and they're like, oh, it's bad. Write it off because tribalism. I don't know, do Kermit the Frog. Every other martial artist other than me is Kermit the Frog. But yeah, Osai Komi, if anything is going to break out of the Aikido bubble and transfer over to like BJJ or maybe judo, I'd have to double check what the rules are about submitting people who are belly down in judo. But if anything's going to break out, I think it'd be the Osai Komi, quite frankly. There are a couple other things that maybe could. Koshinage is sort of already out, but that's just because hip throws are ubiquitous. I don't really count that. But Osai Komi, Aikido has some pretty unique ones, and I think they're good. I think if you wanted to take anything from Aikido and add it to any other grappling kit that has any ground game, I would look at the Nikyo pin, I would look at the Sankyo pin, and I would look at the Kaitanage pin. Maybe some of the other ones, maybe, but definitely those three. Those three are pretty great. Pretty great. Very reliable. Ukemi. So, Aikido Ukemi is really, really good. I know this is, again, a kind of a broad umbrella, but for anybody who's watching and doesn't know what the heck I'm talking about, this is break falling, basically. And I know I've angered judo people in the past on the internet by saying this, but Aikido has the best break falls in the business. Why do I say that? I say that because A, it's more refined, and I'm going to describe how, but B, Aikido guys throw themselves, as evidenced by all the people on the internet saying so. And it's true. In demonstrations, Aikido people throw themselves, and they are fine when their ukemi is good. It's harder to throw yourself in many cases than it is to be thrown by somebody else, because when you're being thrown by somebody else, they're kind of helping you land properly. Whereas when they aren't helping you that much, and we do help each other in Aikido for what it's worth, but a lot of the times you're kind of just out in space on your own, and you're up to your own devices. What do I mean by ukemi in Aikido is more refined than in Judo? In Judo, there is good ukemi, don't get me wrong. Like, and some is always better than absolutely none. But in Aikido, the Aikido people, when they really know how to do good ukemi, they double slap break fall, so they're hitting with their hand first, and then the side of their body, and they're kind of rolling into it, and then their leg hits. So we call that two slaps. It's like, do, do is the rhythm. And it also just, they know how to slow the velocity of throws down while safely landing. They get lower to the mat. They know how to roll their body against the mat much safer. There's just a lot less impact. Some people might be confused as to why I have this down here as a technique. I personally think ukemi is like its own subsystem. And personally, if you're going to do Aikido for any reason, right? Like, let's say that you're a judo person, and after your judo class, there's an Aikido class. I think it's worth doing that class just to learn ukemi. Screw all this. You think Aikido's shit? That's fine. Think about this, all this stuff up here, as just a vehicle to learn better ukemi. Now, some people might be thinking, well, you can't win a martial arts match with break falling. And that's true. But I think break falling is the most slept on thing in maybe all of English speaking grappling arts. And the reason is that as you get older, right, all of this stuff, the entire judo curriculum, like, you're going to have diminishing returns. You just are. And people are very afraid to take falls. But the reality is this. If you are flexible, if you can take falls well, if you know how to be relaxed under bodily stress, if you can decrease the number of impacts that you're taking per training, not only are you going to be able to train longer, but you're going to be able to train more and train healthier, which means you're going to get better faster. But beyond that, flexibility and like body control and things like that, that's going to make your life, your quality of life rather, so much better as you get older. And ukemi is one of those things that has so many applications outside of the dojo. And I'm not just talking about these anecdotes where people are like, I fell down the stairs or I slipped on ice and I used ukemi and I was fine, which is great. Don't get me wrong. I've heard so many variations on that story, and I'm glad that it helps people in that way. But I think the underspoken quality of ukemi is that it just makes your body like so much more durable. You're so much more flexible. You can move more. You have more body control. I would say that the judo guys, the one thing that they do better with their ukemi than the Aikido people is like the judo people can like dynamically evade throws. So like you'll see them cartwheel out of like a tomoe nage or something. But I think the Aikido people could do that. The really good ones anyway, who are good with ukemi, could do that with not much practice. I have mixed feelings about how he does his Aikido, but if you look at Shirakawa Ryuji's ukemi on YouTube, he's one that I think you could teach how to cartwheel out of a tomoe nage pretty easily. And although I would say that my ukemi is not as good as his by any stretch, I would say that when I was in university, myself and a lot of other people had really, really, really good ukemi. And it's just super good. It's good for martial arts because you're learning the throw from the other side of the fence. You can train more with less damage, but people don't do that because they're like, oh, I want to learn how to throw people. And they just kind of forget about ukemi, right? And it's a big shame. It really is. I think that ukemi is a sub art unto itself, and people should take it far more seriously than they do. Ukemi is getting an S tier. I'm running out of space, aren't I? Uh, uh-oh, my tier list is not responding. Well, while I wait for that, let me gush more. Yeah, ukemi is something that really people should learn out of the gate and focus on out of the gate. There's no substitute for it really. If you have any interest in Aikido actually at all, even if you think that most of the art's crap, this isn't. This is worth doing the art for. Seriously. If you're looking for something for physical fitness, this alone is worth doing the art for. It's like assisted acrobatics. And even if you never ever get as good at it as other people, knowing how to do this at an intermediate level would allow you to go do like gymnastics or something, maybe that you're more interested in. At the very least, it's going to make doing grappling more fun. And if you're having more fun in a martial art, you're going to do it more and you're going to get better faster. Learn how to break fall, people. Stop neglecting this. I really don't like how in the English grappling space, and I blame BJJ mostly for this, honestly. Sorry, BJJ, but so many people are like, oh, if you throw, you're going to die. BJJ people have such a weird, skewed look at taking falls. Yes, it's more wear and tear up front on your body, but if you learn how to do this in the long term, I swear to you, I know I've been doing this since I was like a toddler, but I have never, ever, ever been seriously injured by taking a fall. Not once in my entire career. And I've been doing this for 25 years. Not even once. Sure, mat burns, some bruises here and there, and there's definitely some growing pains when I was learning how to do my ukemi, but for 15 years or so, I have never once worried about being damaged from a fall. Maybe from someone falling on me, but not from the fall itself. Learn how to break fall. You will have so much fun in grappling, so much more fun in grappling if you learn how to break fall. Break out of this perception that like take one fall, end career. That's not true. Go find an art that will teach you how to do this well. If that's judo, fine. Obviously, I'm a big Aikido supporter in this regard, but go learn it where you have to learn it, man. It's the most important part of grappling, in my opinion. You will cut your career in half or more by not learning how to do this. Seriously. Or you're just going to be a butt scooter, which I know some BJJ people don't take it as an insult, but I'm delivering it as one. Sorry. You either condemn yourself to butt scooting or you cut your career in half. Learn how to break fall. Seriously, it pays dividends. I can't stress it as much as any more than what I am right now. Just learn how to break fall. It's S tier. All right, I'm going to stop gushing about that. Move on to the last part here. All right, last one, atemi, which roughly means to strike. And Aikido atemi sucks, man. So I know that people have defined this historically as like distracting strikes. If you're coming from a Tamiki background, it's kind of like hitting them with the body. But as much as I really like Tamiki Aikido, despite not having a ton of experience with it, I kind of think characterizing some of their stuff as atemi is a bit like sophistry. They're still takedowns in effect, even if they do have a hitting component with the body. And for most Aikido systems, they're really talking about striking with the hand. And it's bad. It's very bad. There is no single aspect of Aikido, in my opinion, that needs an update more than atemi. And I know that people will say, well, it's a totally different art with totally different goals. and it's about distracting the person, but you can distract people with good strikes. So there's not really any reason to not be doing good atemi. And this is why I am a big proponent of people going and learning a striking art. And I really don't care what striking art it is. I would say that you should learn to kick, ideally, although boxing is still really good and it'll probably help you learn to cut some of the angles that makes Aikido effective in striking situations. I mentioned before how you want to get behind people, and I think that boxing probably has some of the most sophisticated footwork in the striking space. So I'm not saying like don't box, but I also am saying that kicking is really good to know. I will talk a little bit more about which striking art I would probably do later if I were to do it all over again. But for now, I'm just saying I would take up a striking art because the atemi in Aikido is just not super good. It's never been very good. No one punches like that. Speaking of punching, big weakness of Aikido. I know this isn't necessarily atemi, but like with Kotegaeshi and some of these other ones, you'll see people who from an Aikido background, when they start sparring, they'll like hand hunt. They'll chase hands. Don't do that. You're never going to catch someone's hands. People do not leave their hands out for you to manipulate. Target something slower, like their bicep or their shoulder, and then slide down the sleeve or arm to their wrist if you really want to go for some of these wrist manipulations. I think the wrist manipulations are weaker than the ones that attack the torso, obviously, given my list here. But please do not hand hunt. You will get punched about 8 times in a row and have a bad time. There are other ways where you can kind of fish people's hands out, but you really want to enter a clinch, in my opinion, before you start goofing around with this Aikido stuff. The whole thing where like they punch me and then I react and I snatch their wrists out of the air, and from like a basic movement perspective, it's not bad, but from a sparring perspective, it is. In short, whether you're on the receiving end or the giving end, atemi striking in Aikido is just awful. I don't recommend it. Go learn it from somewhere else and incorporate it later. The good news is, if there's any good news, it's that you can incorporate striking pretty easily into into Aikido rather. It becomes really self-evident later on in your Aikido career where strikes fit in. And I know there's a lot of people where it's like, we do atemi this way, in this very specific way, but I think striking, as evidenced by there are entire arts that devote entire, like that's all they do is strike. This like ukemi is kind of like a sub art, and it deserves the time and attention that a sub art would require to get good at, right? Right now, as it exists, it's just kind of tacked on. Again, I know I wasn't going to talk about weapons, but by the way, I think the weapons are kind of a sub art too. Like I think that weapons, if you want to go that route at least, weapons, atemi, and ukemi, like you could have just classes on these things in a week. Forget about everything else. You could just focus on striking, just focus on break falling, and just focus on weapons, like once a week. And I think your Aikido would be better for it. Instead, a lot of these things kind of get tacked on, or just they hope that you pick it up vicariously. And with atemi, it's the biggest loser of the three. We do not learn good striking in Aikido. It's doo-doo. It's C tier. All right, so that's the whole list. Let me give my final thoughts here, and we'll finally close this video because it's a monster again. But at least this is not that difficult to edit. Cough, cough. If you want to peek behind the curtain, tier lists are some pretty lazy content in terms of editing. I'm literally just been sipping on milk tea and talking into a microphone stream of consciousness for like an hour. Easy peasy. So you might look at my list and be thinking that I'm hugely biased. And yeah, I have my biases, but I do think there is a method to my madness here. I kind of explained my general framework in the list part of the video itself, but let me summarize again. First, let me sum up some of Aikido's weaknesses. I think the biggest problem facing the art is that it doesn't really spend any time teaching students to realistically or reliably set up their techniques. I think all of the attacks the art prepares you for aren't bad necessarily, but the way your partner lets his punches hang out there in midair, or how they'll doggedly hold onto your wrists long after it benefits them, just isn't a really good look for the martial art as a whole. The art is also utterly devoid of good striking, and while it preaches the correct things about movement, it clearly doesn't teach them too well, because movement is often the first thing Aikido people forget about when placed under duress. Obviously, this is all stuff that could be rectified with live sparring. I mentioned earlier that I would talk about an art that I would recommend cross training in, and obviously I do judo and some karate, but if I had to start all over, I would probably choose Muay Thai, or maybe Kudo if I wanted to stick with the gi to pair with Aikido. And the reason for this is I think most of Aikido lives in the clinch, like I said, although you do want to progress to the outside, a little more on that in a bit. But you also want to figure out how to get into the clinch, and I don't think there's an art that does that better than Muay Thai. Plus, your striking is going to get better. So I would really pick Muay Thai, believe it or not. I think that's probably a weird choice coming from me, and maybe lots of Aikido people think that too. But the more I see Muay Thai clinch, the more I see opportunities for Aikido to happen. Obviously, very illegal under Muay Thai rules, but that would be my suggestion. Back to Aikido though, the small joint manipulations aren't super great as game-ending techniques, but they aren't so bad that I think they need to be chucked out of the curriculum entirely or anything. My personal view is that small joint manipulations are like grip fighting plus. What I mean by that is that once you score a wrist lock on someone, they start to be much more cautious about taking otherwise powerful grips. It's just another layer to the grip fighting game. Sometimes it's just the threat of being able to do a wrist lock that is most important because it deters certain gripping behaviors in an opponent. Beyond that, even failed attempts at wrist locks can open up avenues to progressing your own grips, so as long as you don't get tunnel vision. Of course, I'm coming at this from a very judo perspective here, but my point is that we shouldn't be judging wrist locks purely by the number of times we get someone to tap out with them. A lot of these locks have a lot more utility, some of which is functionally invisible, sure, but it's still utility that needs to be acknowledged. Unless it's Yonkyo, because Yonkyo sucks. Although it's not exactly a martial thing, I do want to quickly tack on here that another massive weakness in Aikido is its needless obsession with branding and a refusal to just adopt and adapt techniques that would make the art better and healthier. It's just a culture thing, and this is where the whole like Aikido is a cult criticism I think is deserved, because there's just no reason for this. I honestly think it just makes teachers in the art look insular and in their own bubble and kind of arrogant, especially when a lot of the techniques that they should be adopting that they are ignoring come from arts that if you sparred with them, if an Aikido person rather sparred with them, they'd probably get bodied. Like reverse Seoinage comes to mind. If they sparred with a reverse Seoi specialist, particularly before the ban in judo, they would probably just get absolutely buried in the mat. There's just no reason to not be adopting these things. It drives me crazy, honestly. I have such a hate-love relationship with this art, especially in Japan, because it really is. It just comes across as like used car salesmanship. It's not a good look. I need to stop it. So cool, wrist locks might score some quick taps, but really they are about generating grip fighting progress, at least in my view. But where are we progressing towards? From where I'm sitting, someone with an Aikido grappling base should almost always be progressing to their partners outside. You don't want to be squared off with them, but instead attack asymmetrically. Again, you can think of some common positions like the Russian 2-on-1 or the Judo Gi 2-on-1, maybe even Judo cross collar grips to a lesser degree. No matter how you get there, your goal should be to get to the outside of your partner and gain access to his torso, particularly his back if possible, or the trunk of his body. Because if you recall my list, pretty much everything in S tier except Gokyo and maybe Kaitanage is about attacking the trunk of the body. Once you are in this position, it's really just a binary flowchart. If your opponent resists you to the front, go to the back, and if he resists you to the back, go to the front. Naturally, we can make this more complicated if we want. Maybe you get the chance to drag the person down with chitin, for example, or maybe your partner gets lazy with their grips as they get more desperate to get away from you, and you can actually score a wrist lock. But the core strategy is really just figure out which way they are resisting you and quickly attack the opposite way. So the short version of this strategy is this. Use wrist locks and the threat of wrist locks to grip fight, progress to the outside, attack the trunk of the body in the path of least resistance. No esoteric nonsense, no abstractions, no 1,000 plates to juggle, just a 3-step pathway to a takedown. And again, yes, we could add all the bells and whistles to this, like pins and resets or even strikes depending on the rule set, but the foundation of my strategy has always pretty much been this, or at least this is where I'm at when it comes to using this stuff in live sparring and gi grappling. There are other things I touched on in this video, like break falling being crazy important. I'll probably make a video just on that in the future too, but what I really wanted to get across in this particular piece is 2 simple things. The first is that I think there is plenty in this art worth looking at, even if it's going to require firing some synapses and elbow grease to adapt. And second, there really is a pretty straight line towards achieving takedowns implicit in the art. It's just pretty much never taught this way. At the very least, I had to come to my own conclusions about it. And I know some people would frame that as bad teaching in Aikido. And in some ways, sure, it is. That is a valid criticism, especially when teachers clearly haven't put much thought into their own ideas or the system as a whole. But, and this is a big but, I think people are way too dependent on having everything spoon-fed to them in the casual English-speaking martial arts world. You absolutely need those training wheels when you're learning the fundamentals, don't get me wrong, but I think the fact that Asian martial arts expect you to actually study what you're doing is a strength, not a weakness. Or at least it can be. If there is a theme that cuts to the heart of my channel up until this video, it's that martial artists need to break out of being just blind consumers who want to rapidly optimize their way to transient successes. Martial arts are physical pursuits, and I never argue that you shouldn't be fit and that you shouldn't have a functional martial art. I'm down for people training for whatever they want, but I really do believe that martial arts should be functional, at least for me personally. You can do it for aesthetics, that's fine. My point here is that martial arts are physical, though, don't get me wrong. I'd also argue that you shouldn't be one-note, tunnel vision, copy and pasting stuff into your system either, though. The physical is the martial. The art is the intellectual and creative. Dare to look at your practice or even other martial arts with a critical, but crucially creative eye. Get clever. Although there are legitimately McDojos out there, when you look at a system like Aikido, there is nothing in its history to suggest that it is a grift. Although I don't think most people really do their due diligence and actually read about the history before they just knee-jerk come to conclusions about some of these arts. Even if you think the art is mostly junk, people typically don't develop systems like these without useful kernels to be teased out. A lot of these Asian martial arts that people just write off as bad were founded by people who were very clearly up to something that at least they found to be logical. People don't build things like this for no reason, nor do arts like these exist for as long as they do for no reason. I think there's just a lot of intellectual laziness in the martial arts world. People don't want to do due diligence. They don't want to study. They don't want to check up on the background of things. They just want to learn how to take people down so they can be local champions or whatever. And I'm not saying that being a local champion isn't cool. I'm just also saying that's like maybe 50% of what a martial art is. Now, I am a big proponent, again, of people training for whatever reason they want. But I also think it's a misstep to just toss ideas out because of reputation or because you personally can't get something to work for yourself. There are plenty of techniques on my list in this video that I would love to graduate to S tier. I just haven't seen the evidence for that yet. The point here is to think deeply about martial arts rather than just doing them, going through the motions, just getting tunnel vision on some success at a local tournament or something that no one's going to remember in 20 years. I guarantee you will enjoy martial arts more, and you will be able to stamp your own signature on your style much earlier and in much brighter ink if you think critically about these things. All right, that is all from me for now. I don't want to browbeat you anymore. I hope you liked this style of content. It was very much more off the cuff, just for fun, although I do think there are some legitimate things that I like to talk about on this channel in this video. It wasn't just a filler episode. So thank you so much for listening. If you're interested in some of my recent background in Aikido, you can watch the video on screen now, but feel free to watch my other stuff too, as it helps the channel out significantly. We've been growing pretty fast recently, and I am very grateful for that. I hope you always can feel how appreciative I am. We might be small, but I really do hope we can keep up this pace. It is very reassuring, and it just inspires me to make more videos and eventually make better content. I do at some point want to actually film myself doing martial arts, but there are some loopholes here in, well, loopholes isn't the right word, obstacles rather, here in Japan that I would have to overcome to figure out how to do that. Particularly video privacy rules are they're a little draconic. You got to be very careful about who you film and when you post that film in Japan. So I will have to figure out ways to film myself. But it's coming, hopefully soon. Subscribe if you want to see some of that. All right, I will catch you all in the next one. Thank you again for listening and subscribing and liking and commenting and all that stuff. And yeah, till next time. Peace.